A child's bike leans against the rusted fence of an empty home. The curtains in the window don't move anymore. On the main street, the grocery store lights haven't flickered on in weeks. A silence has settled over towns that once buzzed with Saturday markets and backyard laughter, and no one knows when or if it will lift. Across Australia, something deeper than an economic downturn is unfolding. Lifelines are being pulled from beneath communities, slowly, quietly. Pensions stretched to breaking. Rural hospitals closing their doors. Entire neighborhoods swallowed by debt, drought, and time. Not with a bang, but with an absence. With fewer buses, fewer teachers, fewer births. And in the spaces left behind, an eerie question begins to echo. How far can a country fall before it notices the ground is gone? How many warnings can be ignored before the crisis is no longer silent? Because what's unraveling here, behind closed banks, in flood-prone suburbs, in dinner tables cut short, it isn't just happening on the news, it's happening down the street. And maybe, just maybe, it's already begun. Number 10. The Vanishing Towns. Once the Australian countryside was the heartbeat of the nation. Rows of wheat swaying under golden light. Post offices humming with chatter. Kids riding bikes through streets where everyone knew their name. These towns weren't just places on a map. They were the cradle of community, of stories, of generations growing side by side. But today, that heartbeat is fading. The silence creeps in where laughter used to live. And the signs are unmistakable. Shuttered storefronts, peeling paint, grass pushing through broken pavement. The Australia that built itself on rural strength is slowly erasing its own foundation. The shift began quietly, with services slipping away. First the bank, then the grocery, then the doctor stopped visiting. One by one, lifelines vanished, pulled out from under places that once held the country together. Policy after policy favored urban growth, while the bush was left to manage decline. Young people left for opportunity elsewhere. What remained were aging populations, empty classrooms, and towns that look full until you count the lights on at night. In towns like Wilcannia, Bourke, and Stantarno, the human toll is not just economic, it's emotional. Grandparents care for grandkids because the parents are gone. Ambulances arrive hours too late. Social clubs gather in silence, remembering when the rooms were full. The pub still stands, but it closes earlier now, not from lack of drink, but lack of people. A generation that once dreamed in these places now watches them decay. What does it say about a nation when it forgets the soil it came from? When memory-rich places are left to rot quietly in the sun? Are we still a country of shared purpose, or just scattered dots drifting further apart? The loss of these towns is not isolated. It's the first ripple, and it's already moving outward. Number 9. The hidden pension time bomb. For decades, Australia's superannuation system was hailed as a global success, a promise that hard work would one day be rewarded with independence, security, and dignity in retirement. The vision was simple: contribute through your working life, and the system would care for you in your later years. But beneath the glossy headlines and confident forecasts, something is unraveling, slowly, quietly. And for millions of retirees, the cracks are no longer invisible. The fracture began as costs rose faster than savings. Interest rates fell, but so did returns. Markets grew unstable. Many older Australians, who spent their lives without employer-paid super, rely now on the age pension, a system under increasing strain. Today, over 4 million Australians depend on the public pension, and nearly half of all retirees retire with less than $150,000 in their super. That's not enough for rising rent, medical bills, and the price of simply staying warm in winter. And yet, the system keeps moving, as if the numbers will somehow take care of the people behind them. Behind those numbers are faces. A woman in her 70s, still cleaning motel rooms because her savings were wiped out by a market downturn. A retired couple selling their home because the bills outgrew their budget. A man who worked on the rail lines for 40 years, now counting coins at the pharmacy, unsure which medication he can do without. These are not isolated cases, they are warnings, and they are growing louder. What kind of society forgets those who built its roads, taught its children, harvested its food? If a lifetime of contribution no longer ensures a stable old age, then what was the promise for? This is not just a pension crisis, it's a dignity crisis, and its shadow is stretching across every generation still to come. Number 8. The healthcare deserts. There was a time when getting sick didn't feel like a gamble. When every town had a clinic, a nurse who knew your name, and a hospital within reach. Healthcare was never perfect, but it was present, dependable, local. Today, that presence is vanishing. Across regional Australia, The distance between illness and care is growing, and with it, the quiet fear that when help is needed most, it simply won't come. The fracture is systemic. By 2026, Australia is projected to face a shortage of over 85,000 nurses and nearly 11,000 general practitioners. In the bush, that number doesn't just mean longer waits, it means no care at all. Emergency departments are closing overnight. Expectant mothers are sent hours away to deliver. Cancer patients drive hundreds of kilometers for a 10-minute consultation. And the government's promise of telehealth is cold comfort in places where the internet is patchy and lives are on the line. In towns like Gunda, Port Augusta, and Katherine, the human toll is mounting. Elderly residents skip checkups because the fuel costs too much. A father watches his child's fever rise while waiting for an ambulance that's coming from 2 towns over. In aged care homes, workers are stretched so thin they miss meals, not their own, but the ones they're meant to serve. We measure a nation's values by what it protects. If care is only available to those who live near capital cities, what message does that send to the rest? Who is deemed worth saving, and who is left to wait? This isn't just about health, it's about disappearing trust. And the further the healthcare desert spread, the more fragile every life beyond the city limits becomes. Number 7. Cities that can't breathe. From a distance, the skylines still shimmer. Sydney's harbour glows at sunset. Melbourne's cafes hum with life. The cities appear to thrive, dense, dynamic, full of opportunity. But walk a little further from the CBD, and the shine begins to dim. Empty shops, rental signs that never come down, tired faces on long commutes. Australia's urban centres may look alive, but many are suffocating under their own weight. The core fracture lies in unchecked growth. Migration has surged, with more than 100,000 people moving into cities like Melbourne each year. But the infrastructure has not kept pace. Housing supply lags. Public transport is stretched thin. Schools overflow. Hospitals buckle. And in this tightening grip, it's not just affordability that disappears, it's livability. For older Australians, the shift is especially painful. Once stable neighbourhoods have become unrecognisable. Long-time residents are priced out, pushed further from family and services. A retired teacher in the western suburbs now shares her home with lodgers to afford the rates. A widower in Brisbane lives alone on a waiting list for aged care support in a tower surrounded by strangers. The city promised convenience. Instead, it offers congestion and quiet isolation. So what happens when cities grow, but the soul of community is lost? When the lights stay on, but fewer people feel at home beneath them? Growth without grounding is not progress, it's pressure. And for those already struggling, it's a burden that gets heavier each year. The story of Australia's decline is not just written in fading towns, it's echoing through its biggest cities. And the next fault line is closer than we think. Number 6. The collapse of public trust. There was a time when people believed the system would hold, that elected leaders, whatever their flaws, would steer the country with some measure of foresight, some sense of duty. But that quiet faith, the belief that someone, somewhere, was watching the road ahead, is fading fast, and in its place, resignation, suspicion, a bitter understanding that too many decisions now serve short terms, not future generations. The fracture widened slowly. Scandals came and went, misuse of funds, failed inquiries, promises made and broken. Each one chipped away at something deeper than reputation, the public sense of being heard, seen, represented. Today, 60% of Australians say they no longer trust the government to plan for the future. That figure isn't just a poll, it's a reflection of a fraying social contract, and the consequences are everywhere. In disaster zones, survivors wait weeks for aid that never comes. In public housing queues, families linger for years. In remote communities, water runs brown while budgets go unspent. Older Australians, who paid their taxes, followed the rules, contributed across decades, now watch as the pillars they helped build are repainted, repackaged, and slowly abandoned. What happens to a democracy when the people stop believing in its ability to protect, to repair, to lead, when truth becomes slippery and accountability fades into noise? This isn't just political fatigue, it's moral exhaustion, and as trust collapses, so does the foundation that holds a nation together. What breaks next is no longer a question of if, but how much more we can afford to lose. If this story feels close to home, you're not alone. Subscribe to stay with us. We're only just beginning to uncover what lies beneath. Let us know where you're watching from and what part of this quiet unraveling stays with you. Because sometimes the first step toward change is simply paying attention. Number 5. The coming mortgage shock. For generations, owning a home in Australia was more than an aspiration. It was a rite of passage, a sign that the hard work had paid off. A roof over your head, a garden out the back, and something to leave behind. But today, that sense of certainty is being slowly dismantled, and what was once a cornerstone of stability has become, for many, a quiet source of fear. The fracture began as interest rates rose, first gradually, then relentlessly. For families who borrowed in better times, repayments have now doubled or tripled. 1 in 4 Australian households is experiencing mortgage stress, with thousands already in arrears. For older Australians who help their children into homes, often by unlocking the value of their own, the pressure is shared, felt across generations. What once brought pride now brings paperwork, tension, and worry. You can see it behind drawn curtains. A young couple takes on extra shifts while their parents delay retirement to help cover rising repayments. A pensioner sells the family home, not to downsize, but to bail out their son's mortgage. The home is no longer a sanctuary. It's a liability that moves from hand to hand, always heavier. So what happens when a house is no longer a shelter, but a burden? When generational wealth becomes generational risk. We are not just witnessing a housing correction, we are living through a shift in what the Australian dream even means. And as more households fall behind, the ripple effect reaches schools, shops, and local services. Because when the roof feels unstable, everything beneath it starts to shake. Number 4. Inflation and the erosion of dignity. There's a quiet humiliation in watching prices rise faster than your pension. A slow, grinding erosion of confidence, of independence. For most of their lives, older Australians weathered recessions, paid their dues, saved what they could. But now, in the years meant for rest, they are being asked to make impossible choices. Not with drama, but with quiet daily sacrifice. The fracture deepened as inflation took root in essentials, the things no one can live without. Groceries, petrol, electricity, medications, even second-hand items now come with first-rate prices. Since 2021, the cost of living has surged, while the age pension has struggled to keep pace. The official numbers tell one story, but in homes across the country, the reality is far more personal. In suburban kitchens, pensioners count out coins, not for indulgences, but for bread and milk. In winter, heaters stay off to save on bills, even when the cold sinks deep into the bones. Some skip meals, so grandchildren don't have to. These aren't rare stories. They are the quiet truth lived behind thousands of closed doors. And so we ask, what does it say about a society when its elders, the ones who built, taught, and served, are left to feel like a burden in their own homes? When surviving old age demands more resilience than living through youth, this isn't just about money. It's about dignity, about how a lifetime of contribution is slowly being weighed against the price of a loaf of bread. And for many, that's a cost too high to bear. Number 3. The Superannuation Mirage, RMIS, was meant to be the great Australian safeguard, a system designed to reward decades of hard work with peace of mind. Superannuation was sold as the answer to aging with independence. But beneath the glossy advertising and investment forecasts, another truth is emerging, one that leaves millions heading into retirement, not with certainty, but with quiet anxiety. The fracture lies in the illusion of enough. While some high-income earners retire comfortably, the average Australian walks into retirement with a super balance far below what's needed. Nearly half of retirees leave the workforce with less than $150,000, barely enough for a few years, let alone decades of rising costs. Women, carers, and part-time workers are especially exposed, and hidden within many super funds are high fees, poor returns, and complex terms that few fully understand. In real life, it means retired couples returning to casual work. It means delaying dental visits. It means a grandmother selling her jewelry to pay for car repairs, or a man in his 80s using payday loans to cover rising rent. These are not mismanaged lives. These are people who did what was asked and now find the promise hollow. So what does superannuation truly secure, and for whom? When a lifetime of saving still ends in struggle, what was the system really designed to protect? This is not just a policy gap, it's a growing disillusionment, one that calls into question how we value those who've given a lifetime and what we expect them to live on when that time is over. Number 2. Climate migration begins at home. For decades, the Australian coastline was a dream etched into the national psyche. Sunlit porches, sea breezes, a retirement by the water. It was where many chose to build not just homes, but lives. Now that dream is washing away, literally. And with every flood, every fire, every cancelled insurance policy, More Australians are being forced to make a decision they never imagined: stay and risk everything, or leave the place they once called safe. The fracture began where climate and cost collided. In flood-prone regions of Queensland and fire-ravaged corners of New South Wales, insurance premiums have soared beyond affordability or vanished altogether. By 2030, 1 in 7 Australian homes could be deemed uninsurable, and without insurance, a home becomes a financial time bomb. What was once the crown jewel of retirement becomes the first thing to go. In coastal towns like Lismore, Tathra, and Gympie, the stories multiply. Elderly couples living on raised stilts, not for the view, but to survive the next flood. Families gutting their homes for the third time in 5 years, wondering if this will be the last. Retirement villages caught between sea level rise and withdrawal notices from insurers. No news crews, no headlines, just slow retreat. So what happens when nature redraws the map and policy fails to keep up? When the places we chose for peace turn hostile? Climate migration isn't coming, it's already begun. And for many, it means starting over when life was meant to slow down. This isn't just about weather, it's about belonging, about watching the very land beneath your memories disappear and knowing you may have to walk away from all of it. Number 1. Intergenerational Breakdown. For much of Australia's modern history, the thread between generations was strong. Parents sacrificed for their children. Grandparents passed down more than just stories. They passed down stability, homes, traditions, a sense of place. But now, that thread is fraying, quietly, unevenly. And in households across the country, something once sacred is slipping away. The fracture reveals itself not in headlines, but in living rooms. More than 45% of adults under 30 now live with their parents, not by choice, but necessity. At the same time, aged care facilities face critical worker shortages, leaving many older Australians alone, unsupported, and afraid. The great exchange, youth for wisdom, time for care, is breaking down under the weight of an economy that serves neither the young nor the old. It plays out in subtle, painful moments. A retiree skips medication to help pay their daughter's rent. A young father moves his family back into his childhood bedroom. A grandmother sits in aged care, waiting hours for help to the bathroom, while her grandson waits months for a public housing spot. The divide is not just financial, it's emotional. 2 generations both struggling, yet drifting further apart. And so we ask, what happens when the family no longer functions as a refuge, when each generation feels like a burden to the other? This is not just a social shift, it's a moral one. Because without care, without connection, what is left to hold a nation together? The great Australian story was once built on unity, on generations lifting each other. But now, with the weight rising and the hands letting go, we face a sobering question: who will catch us when we fall apart together? What we've just seen isn't just news, it's a mirror, held up to a country quietly shifting beneath our feet. The towns that once raised generations are emptying. The promises of retirement security are cracking, and the threads that once bound young and old, rural and urban, rich and struggling, are wearing thin. These aren't distant projections, they're real, they're already happening. Behind every trend is a name, a face, a life in transition, an elderly woman choosing between food and medication, a young father packing his family into his childhood room, a nurse walking out of a rural clinic for the last time. This isn't a crisis of sudden collapse, it's one of slow erosion, and it touches us all. There is no single fix, but there is responsibility to pay attention, to speak up, not in fear, but in truth, to demand policies that serve people, not just numbers, to value connection over convenience, and to ensure that dignity, in every stage of life, is not a luxury, but a right. If these stories matter to you, subscribe to stay informed. Let us know where you're watching from and what part spoke to you most. And if someone you know needs to see this, share it with them privately, because understanding what's unfolding starts with noticing it.